Why men are always angry with their wife and children. What should a wife do? Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a subject that most people don't want to talk about because it's too common to feel strange and too quiet to feel urgent. You're in the kitchen, sunlight, just peeking through the blinds. Maybe you're still in your robe. The coffee maker gurgles, the eggs sizzle. Then boom, his voice sharp. A joke you made wasn't funny. The cereal is too soggy. The toddler dropped her spoon again. And you feel it rise, not the heat from the stove, but from him. You brace. You probably won't survive this if you try to pretend it's normal forever. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Always love seeing our little bedtime community glow across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through your mornings like a soldier through fog. No alarms blaring, just the low, constant tension that turns every footstep into a guess. Will today be the day he loses it again? And worse, do the kids notice? Of course they do. You catch them flinching when his keys jangle by the door. You see how their eyes dart between your face and his during dinner, trying to read the weather. And it's not like he's a monster. That's the confusing part. You remember when his laugh filled the house, when he'd rock the baby to sleep humming badly but sweetly. But now anger is the default. He's mad before he's even conscious. Mornings begin with slamming drawers. The toothpaste is in the wrong place. You asked him something too soon, or not soon enough. Historians still argue whether the shift in domestic male anger is a modern psychological crisis, or just a more visible version of old norms. Either way, you're living in it. Here's the thing: they don't teach you how to navigate this as a wife. There's no manual titled How to Speak to Your Husband Without Activating His Deeply Repressed Rage. You try different tones: soothing, playful, direct, silent. None of it works. Breakfast becomes a ritual of avoidance. You stir oatmeal slower so you don't clang the spoon. You wait until he's got his shoes on before reminding him the electricity bill is due. Even then, his response slices. Can't you see I'm already dealing with enough? It's not the content. It's the timing. Or maybe the tone. Or maybe something you can't see at all. But you notice the kid's eyes again. They've become storm trackers too. The way your oldest tugs her sleeves over her hands. How your son stands in the hallway watching, not speaking, as if shrinking might protect him. You tell yourself it's temporary, just a stressful season. Except seasons change. This doesn't. Back in the 1950s, American households were sold a dream on glossy magazine pages: smiling fathers returning home to kiss their lipstick-clad wives and play baseball with the boys. But buried in those happy ads was a sinister silence. No one talked about how many of those fathers yelled, threatened, or sulked for hours without explanation. That part wasn't printable. Even older, in ancient Greece, men ruled the home as Kyrios, lord and protector, yes, but also enforcer. Their word was law. Anger wasn't just tolerated, it was righteous. You get the uncomfortable feeling that centuries later, that unspoken entitlement still breathes behind his furrowed brows. One fringe theory even argues that modern men carry ancestral trauma from millennia of being conditioned for war and domination, and that, in peacetime, that aggression spills into domestic life, rechanneled onto those closest to them. You don't know about all that. You just know the coffee's gone cold again because your stomach nodded when he walked in. What's worse is how quickly the switch flips. After snapping at you over the thermostat setting, he might text you an hour later, "Hey, do we need anything from Costco?" And you're supposed to reply like nothing happened. Smile emoji. Exclamation point. You reply anyway, because you don't want to make it worse. And that's the trap. His anger sets the pace, and your role becomes managing it. diffusing, soothing, planning. Even your body language adjusts, your shoulders fold inward at his presence. You breathe more quietly. You laugh less. Not because you're scared in the dramatic movie kind of way, but in the slow, weary kind that wears you down cell by cell. One morning, he says something so sharp it takes your breath for a second. The baby whimpers, startled, and instead of reacting, you pause and whisper, "Why are you always angry?" He scoffs, "I'm not angry. You're just too sensitive." And just like that, the weight shifts again from his shoulders back onto yours. You wonder when it started. Was it after the second baby? When his promotion didn't happen? When the pandemic hit and the whole world cracked open? You try to trace it back like a crime scene, but the trail is cold and scattered. Still, every crime scene has one thing: evidence. And this breakfast table, it's littered with clues. Silence, eye rolls, cold toast. Apologies from you that feel more like survival than guilt. He finishes his coffee and leaves. The door shuts, the car drives off, and for a moment, just a flicker, you can breathe fully again. The house is lighter, the eggs are warm, the kids smile, but you know what's coming later. And that's how the cycle starts again. Section 2. You clean up breakfast in slow, thoughtful motions, each scrape of a plate into the sink, oddly meditative. But even now, your mind loops. You replay his face, his tone, his volume. You wonder if you should have phrased it differently, if maybe it really was a bad time to ask about the Wi-Fi bill. But deep down, that tiny voice, quiet and stubborn, asks, why do you keep having to adapt to him? He doesn't adapt to you. You start to realize something strange. His anger isn't always triggered by big things. In fact, it's usually the small stuff. A late start to the day, the kids being loud, you suggesting frozen pizza again. It's as if he carries a weight you can't see, and every little thing you do either helps him carry it or makes it crash down. And still you love him. That's the hardest part. You know his laugh when it's real. The way he kisses your temple when you're both too tired to talk. You've seen the softness. It's not gone, just buried. And that makes it harder to walk away or even confront him. Because how do you fight someone who keeps disappearing behind his own storm cloud? Historians still argue whether traditional gender roles were biologically designed or socially forced. But whatever the origin, one thing's clear: men have long been conditioned to provide, protect, and suppress. From stoic samurai to silent factory dads in post-WW1 towns, America, the world praised men who toughed it out and never complained. Which means when modern life throws curveballs, layoffs, emotional labor, identity crises, many men simply don't have the tools to handle it without turning volcanic. And so guess who catches the lava? Not his boss, not the government, not the mirror. You. The modern household in many ways is a paradox. It demands equality on paper, shared chores, co-parenting, two incomes. But emotionally, the scales often tip. You do the emotional heavy lifting. You remember the dentist appointments, the classroom snacks, his mom's birthday. And when he erupts, you absorb that too. One quirky finding from a 2022 psychology survey: men in heterosexual marriages report higher perceived burdens of responsibility even when their wives do more. Why? Because emotional responsibility often feels heavier to those unused to carrying it. He might say things like, "I do everything for this family," or "You have no idea the pressure I'm under." And it's not that he's wrong. Life is stressful, but it's also a sleight of hand. Because somehow, even when you're both drowning, his pain matters more. One Saturday morning, he's pacing because the garage door opener won't work. The toddler asks for juice. You're about to respond when he growls, "Can't someone just handle something for once?" You freeze. The juice spills. He storms out. The kids look at you. You smile barely. But later, when he calms down and says, "Sorry, I just had a lot on my plate," you nod and forgive. Again. But you're also starting to understand that his plate is invisible and yours has been overflowing for years. In ancient Rome, men who failed in their paterfamilias role could be seen as dishonored. Their solution wasn't therapy, it was doubling down stricter rules, louder voices. And while you're not living in a marble villa with togas, the echo is familiar. He measures himself by things he can control: finances, plans, decisions. But emotions. Chaos. The toddler's tantrum feels like failure. Your tiredness feels like rejection. A quiet Sunday feels like a trap for his restless brain. And without knowing it, he lashes out. Historians debate whether this form of anger is a defense mechanism against internal helplessness. Some believe it's inherited behavior observed from male figures growing up. Others argue it's societal, that the world only gives men two emotional options: anger or apathy. And if he's not ready to go numb, he chooses rage. You start noticing a pattern. On days when he feels useful, like fixing the sink or solving a tech issue, he's calm, even affectionate. But when plans fall apart, his ego takes the hit. He lashes out to protect it. Not because you failed him, but because life did. You begin walking on tiptoes, not just in action, but in thought. You rehearse conversations in your head. You soften requests into questions. You delete text drafts. You pretend you didn't hear that tone just to keep the air safe for the kids. And what about the children? That's the part that tugs hardest. Your son mimics his dad's clenched jaw. Your daughter hugs her doll tighter when voices rise. You worry they'll grow up thinking anger is love. Or worse, that silence is safety. At bedtime, your son asks you, "Why is daddy always mad?" And you want to scream. Not at your child, but at the world for handing you a man full of bruises he never learned to name. But instead, you say daddy's having a hard time. It's not your fault. And later, you whisper it to yourself too. It's not your fault. Still, you lay awake wondering if love means tolerating this. If kindness means being his calm when he won't find his own. If being a good wife means taking the emotional bruises so the kids won't have to. You turn the lights off and stare at the ceiling. And tomorrow it'll be breakfast again. Section 3. The next day rolls in without ceremony, as they always do. The sky is gray. You wake before him on purpose. The kids are still asleep, and for just a sliver of time, the house is yours. Your sanctuary. The kettle hisses softly. You hold your mug close to your lips, the steam kissing your face. No one is yelling. Yet. And then the bedroom door opens. His footsteps come heavy down the hall. He's already sighing. You don't even have to see his face to know he's in one of those moods. Maybe he didn't sleep well. Maybe he's stressed about something at work. Or maybe nothing happened at all. But once again, you are the thermostat for his weather. You brace yourself, like you always do. You try to be neutral, maybe even cheerful. A soft, "Good morning?" He grunts in response, sits down at the table already annoyed. With the noise, with the dishes, with you. And once again, the tension thickens like syrup. It wasn't always like this. You remember that. He used to be warm, playful even. But slowly, too slowly to notice at first it changed. Now it feels like he's looking for something to be mad at, something to punish. And you and the kids, you're the only targets available. So you ask yourself, why? Well, maybe it's not about you at all. The history of male household anger traces back far deeper than most people are comfortable admitting. Ancient Mesopotamian tablets, yep, literal stone tablets, depicted husbands with the right to discipline wives and children for perceived disobedience. The idea of a man being master of the house isn't just a phrase, it's a fossil of an old world still buried in the modern man's mind. Even into the 1800s, European and American men were legally allowed to correct their wives. Some early English common laws permitted a man to beat his wife with a stick no thicker than his thumb. That's where we get the phrase rule of thumb. Cozy, huh? Historians still argue whether this legacy has fully died or if it's just been rebranded as short temper stress or personality. But think about it. If for generations, society conditioned men to see their home as a space of total control, what happens when modern marriage demands partnership instead of power? Many flail, some fight, and others fume constantly. You've seen it. He isn't just mad when things go wrong. He's mad when he doesn't feel needed when things happen without his input, when the kids make decisions, when you handle something without consulting him. It's not about control, he claims it's about being respected. But the line is paper thin. One fringe theory in family psychology circles is that modern male rage in the home is actually grief. Not grief over death, but over lost dominance. Men who grew up watching their fathers as unquestioned heads of household now struggle in egalitarian marriages. They grieve the simple roles of old, and rage becomes their ritual. You think back to when he used to fix the car or handle the taxes. That gave him a role, purpose. But now that you split the load, you notice he's resentful, not relieved. He'll say things like, "I can never do anything right after one small critique." Or worse, "You'd be better off without me." That one cuts, because you don't want to be without him. You want him present, loving, not hollowed out by ego and defensiveness. But his anger doesn't stay contained. It leaks into every corner of the house. You see it in how the kids tiptoe around him. You feel it in how your shoulders tense every time his keys jingle. It's no longer about what he's angry about. It's that he's angry at all. You once tried to talk about it gently, sat him down, chose your words carefully, told him how the kids flinched, how your chest tightens when he enters the room. He sighed. "So now I'm the villain." And you felt like the floor opened beneath you. Even when you don't accuse, he hears blame. Even when you don't yell, he hears disrespect. And so you stop trying, because it hurts too much to walk into a wall and call it a doorway. You learn to manage instead of communicate. You predict the anger and pad the world around it. You take the kids out when you sense a storm. You agree when you want to argue. You stay silent when you want to scream. But silence doesn't make it safer, just quieter. You're not alone, you know. A study by Pew Research found that nearly 60% of wives in two-parent households report that they're the primary emotional managers of the home even when both partners work. And many say their husbands become angry when they feel left out or unappreciated despite doing less. It's like living next to a volcano that erupts because the wind changed. The truth. He's not really angry at you. He's angry at the world, and you're just the safest target. You're the one who won't leave, the one who forgives, the one who stays. But it chips away at you, day by day, word by word, tone by tone. And still, somehow you keep loving him. Not blindly, but deeply. Because you remember, because you hope, because you believe there's still a man underneath the noise who doesn't want to be like this. And maybe there is, but how long can you wait? Section 4. You used to think his anger was just about work. After all, he'd come home late, exhausted, face drawn, rubbing his temples. You told yourself he's tired, he's under pressure, give him space. That's what everyone says, right? That men carry the weight of providing and that stress must go somewhere. But then came the weekend. No emails, no phone calls, no deadlines. Still angry. The way he snapped when the kids wanted pancakes instead of cereal. The way he scowled when you put the forks in the dishwasher the wrong way. The way he got up mid-movie and muttered, "This house is always a mess," though it wasn't. It was cleaner than usual, actually. And that's when the thought creeps in. Maybe this isn't about work. Maybe this is about him. Historians still argue whether the 20th century shift from manual labor to intellectual work redefined male identity or just dismantled it without replacement. For centuries, a man's sense of self was tied directly to his output. He farmed, forged, fought. There was visible proof of his worth. But now he stares at spreadsheets, attends meetings, writes reports no one reads. And when he walks through the front door hungry for proof that he matters, but finds a messy playroom and you scrolling through your phone, it stings him in ways even he can't name. Not that it excuses it, but it explains it maybe. A quirky historical tidbit. In medieval France, a man who refused to work or contribute could be paraded through the streets riding backwards on a donkey mocked by townsfolk. Public shame was the motivator. Now shame is quieter. It happens in his own head. He feels replaceable, invisible, and anger becomes the armor. But what he doesn't realize is that every time he puts it on, he pushes you further away. You've tried reassuring him, complimenting him, thanking him, but it's like pouring water into a bucket with a hole. No matter how much you give, it never fills. Because what he really wants is something you can't provide, a sense of self that doesn't crumble when he's not in control. And sometimes, though you'd never say it aloud, you notice his anger flares most when you're doing well. When the kids are clinging to you. When you solve a problem before he notices it. When you're laughing with a friend. There's a flicker in his eyes, something bitter and wordless. He might say, "Must be nice to relax all day with that sideways tone," or, "I guess I'm just the background noise now." And it stuns you, because you were always told support him, be his rock. But no one ever warned you that your strength might make him feel weak. You find yourself minimizing your wins, downplaying your joy. Not because he's outright cruel, but because your happiness seems to agitate him. Like it threatens his spot in the household hierarchy. He's not always aware of it, but you see it. You see it in the way he suddenly criticizes dinner the night you were proud of it. The way he teases you in front of friends, but the joke has an edge. The way he turns cold after you spend time with someone else. There's a term floating in some psychology circles, ego erosion. It happens when a man's perceived authority in the home starts slipping, when decisions become shared, when emotions are expected, when vulnerability is required. Many men weren't taught how to adapt, so they don't. They push back. They rage. And you are left asking, how can I help without disappearing? Because that's the paradox. The more you accommodate, the more invisible you become. And the more invisible you become, the more resentful you feel. Until one day, you look in the mirror and don't recognize the woman you've shaped yourself into just to keep the peace. You used to speak freely, laugh loudly, dance in the kitchen. Now you weigh every word, swallow your laughter, and you only dance when no one's home. And still people say he's a good man, he works hard, he provides. Yes, but good men can still make bad environments. It's hard to explain that to people. Because he doesn't scream in public, he doesn't throw things, he doesn't hit, but he hurts. With silence, with sarcasm, with withdrawal, with disdain. And you know deep down that if a stranger treated you the way your husband sometimes does, you wouldn't tolerate it for a minute. But because it's him, because you love him, because you've built a life together, you hesitate. You make excuses. He didn't mean it. It's just a phase. He's stressed. You tell yourself you're being dramatic. That plenty of couples have rough patches. But how many patches does it take to realize the whole quilt is unraveling? One evening, you sit on the porch alone. The kids are asleep. He's inside watching TV, already annoyed you needed a moment. You stare at the stars and wonder, is this what marriage is supposed to feel like? And then, almost without permission, your mind drifts to what peace might feel like, what it might be like to wake up not bracing for someone else's explosion, to be able to speak without fear, to be loved without navigating a minefield. It feels like fantasy, but it shouldn't. You deserve calm. You deserve joy. You deserve to feel safe in your own home. And maybe, just maybe it's time to stop managing his storms and start asking why he never learned to carry an umbrella. Section 5. The next time it happens, you're not surprised. It's over something absurd, a misplaced phone charger. He storms through the hallway, muttering under his breath, "Nothing is ever where I leave it," slamming drawers with enough force to rattle picture frames. The kids freeze like statues. You feel your jaw tighten, and this time, instead of rushing to soothe him, you just watch. You don't offer solutions. You don't apologize for something you didn't do. You don't join the scavenger hunt. You simply observe. And that's when you start to see it, the invisible scorecard. Because it's there, all right, floating behind his eyes. A mental ledger he's been tallying for years. Every bill he's paid. Every time he mowed the lawn, every hour he worked, all logged under deposits. And now he's looking around for his withdrawals, recognition, gratitude, admiration. Except no one else got a copy of the rules. And you were never told there was a game. Historians still argue whether early domestic dynamics were based on mutual duty or quiet competition. Some scholars believe traditional marriages were built like contracts: you provide this, I'll provide that. But modern partnerships are messier, less defined, which means when one partner starts keeping score while the other thinks you're on the same team, resentment blooms like mold. You've noticed it before, the way he'll bring up old sacrifices in totally unrelated conversations. You'll ask if he can pick up milk, and he'll say, "Sure, just like how I worked through that entire vacation so we could afford the new roof." You blink confused. That was 2 years ago. It's not that he wants to hurt you, it's that he feels like he's losing, that he's doing more than you realize, that he's unthanked, unseen. A quirky psychology finding. In one study, husbands who felt unappreciated by their families were more likely to report higher levels of domestic anger even if their contribution was objectively less than their partner's. In other words, feeling unseen hurt more than being unproductive. And that's the riddle. He feels like he's giving everything, but what he really wants is validation. So you try. You say thank you. You compliment his work ethic. You admire his fix-it skills. You stroke his ego like a violin. But it never lasts. Because here's the truth: if someone doesn't feel worthy inside, no external praise sticks. It slides right off. It's like trying to feed a ghost. You notice something else too: his tendency to tally your mistakes. They linger in his mind like sticky notes on a cluttered fridge. That one time you forgot the oil change. That birthday you barely celebrated. That one sarcastic comment in 2019. It doesn't matter how many dinners you've cooked, how many tears you've wiped, how many school emails you've answered. The scoreboard doesn't run in both directions. And you start to wonder how many women are quietly drowning under these invisible rules. How many are performing in a rigged game, trying to earn peace, earn kindness, earn safety. You flash back to a family gathering months ago. He made a joke at your expense about how you always forget stuff. Everyone laughed. You smiled politely. But inside, you folded. You knew it wasn't about that one thing. It was about the running total in his mind. And everyone else had just been given a glimpse of the tally sheet. Later, he brushed it off. "I was just joking. Don't be so sensitive." But it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a receipt. Historians note that in many patriarchal societies, the concept of debt in marriage was spiritual as well as practical. Wives were often seen as lifelong recipients of a husband's grace, no matter how hard they worked. That undercurrent still pulses today. It's subtle, unspoken, but you feel it when he acts like you owe him for doing the dishes once. When he pouts if you don't praise him for taking the kids out for an hour. You never keep score, not because you couldn't, but because if you did, you might start screaming. So now when he walks around tight-lipped and heavy-footed because he put gas in your car, you simply nod. You're too tired to play. But it eats at you slowly, like erosion on stone, because you're not just living with his moods, you're living under them. And you start to ask yourself things you never dared before. Not, "How do I fix this?" but "Why am I the one trying to fix this?" Not, "How can I do more?" but "Why is what I do never enough?" One night you dream of a house where no one keeps score, where kindness is given freely, where apologies are real and not just strategic. You wake up with the ache of it still in your chest, and it makes you cry quietly in the dark. Because dreams aren't supposed to feel like relief. Reality is. Section 6. It's a Saturday morning, one of those rare, slow ones where the sun hits the windows just right, and the house smells like coffee and toast. You sit with your daughter at the kitchen table coloring. She asks why Daddy doesn't smile anymore. And your hand trembles just a little, because there it is. The thing you've been trying to protect them from is now growing visible in them. You want to tell her it's not her fault, that it's not about her drawing on the wall or spilling the juice or asking too many questions. But you're also tired of making excuses for a man who never thinks about how small eyes see him. She's only 6 and she already notices that Dad's love has moods. Historians still argue whether children in ancient civilizations were more emotionally bonded to mothers by design or by necessity. In Roman society, for instance, fathers held absolute authority, but were often emotionally distant, more administrator than parent. Their presence meant order, their absence meant peace. You wonder if your kids are already learning a version of this, that dad equals caution and mom equals comfort. And that's the heartbreak. Because your children are learning to walk on eggshells before they've even learned to spell the word. Your son used to be fearless, bounding through the living room like a whirlwind of laughter and sticky fingers. Now, he peeks first, checks the mood, edges into the room like a servant checking a king's expression. It's not just discipline. You believe in structure. But this isn't correction, it's fear. And one night you hear your daughter whisper to her teddy bear, "Don't make Daddy mad, okay?" And something in you shatters. You always thought you could buffer it, that your love and softness and bedtime stories could balance it out, that you could hold the front line while they stayed innocent. But children are observant in ways adults forget. They feel tone before they understand words. They remember tension more than they remember toys. And when he yells, they don't hear "I'm overwhelmed." They hear "I don't love you right now." A quirky but chilling fact: in a 2018 child development study, researchers found that children exposed to chronic paternal anger, even when not directed at them, showed higher levels of anxiety, hypervigilance, and lower self-esteem by age 7. Not because of abuse, just anger. Just the vibe of never knowing when the peace will break. And the real kicker: many of these fathers didn't see themselves as angry. They saw themselves as stressed, as misunderstood, as victims of circumstance. You've seen that too. When you bring it up, he denies it. "I don't yell that much. They're just dramatic. It's not a big deal." And you realize with a sinking ache that he's not just angry, he's blind to it. You've tried showing him, recording his tone, repeating his words back, asking him to imagine someone talking to his daughter the way he talks to you. It never lands. Because his anger isn't about facts, it's about feeling powerless. And when he feels powerless, he reasserts himself the only way he knows, by asserting power over the one place he thinks he still has control: home. And you're caught in the middle, trying to protect your children from their own father without turning them against him, trying to correct without undermining, trying to love someone who's hurting everyone, including himself. You find yourself saying things like, "Daddy had a hard day," so many times it becomes a script. The kids nod. But one day your son asks, "Why does Daddy always have hard days, but we have to be quiet?" You blink, because he's right. You've trained your children to adapt to a man who won't adapt to them. And that, more than anything, stings. So you start small. You begin to intervene. When the volume rises, you speak calm but firm. "That's not how we talk in this house." When the kids cower, you kneel beside them, hand on their back, voice gentle but clear. You didn't do anything wrong. You start reclaiming space. Even if it's just 5 minutes of laughter before bedtime, a silly dance in the hallway, a long hug that tells them this is what safety feels like. Historians note that in some indigenous cultures, the role of the father was not authoritarian but celebratory, participating in rituals of joy and play to bond with children, not as an enforcer, but as an emotional equal. You wonder what it would be like if he could become that kind of father. And deep down, you still hope he might. But until then, you're building the kind of home inside your children that doesn't crumble every time the door opens. Because one day they'll grow up, and what they feel now will shape what they seek later. Whether they believe love feels like quiet panic or like comfort, whether they measure their worth by the volume of someone else's voice. You tuck them in that night and your daughter whispers, "You make me feel safe, Mommy." You hold on to those words like they're gold, because while he storms, you are anchoring. While he rages, you are weaving calm. While he sees disrespect, you are teaching resilience. And one day, maybe they'll look back and realize the strongest person in the room wasn't the loudest, it was the one who stayed kind. Section 7. You've started to notice a pattern in his silence. It's not just the loud outbursts that hurt anymore, it's the cold, still stretches of nothingness that follow. After an argument or even a minor disagreement, he retreats. Not physically. He's still in the house, still eating, still watching TV. But his eyes gloss over you like you're just another lamp or window frame. He becomes a ghost with volume control. You speak, he shrugs. You ask, he grunts. You exist, he ignores. It's not new. But now that you see it for what it is, a form of power, you can't unsee it. Historians still argue whether male emotional withdrawal was a learned coping mechanism from eras of war and hardship or simply a culturally accepted form of passive control. Either way, the effect is the same: emotional starvation. You once read that in a study of long-term marriages, emotional neglect was ranked as painful, sometimes more so than conflict, because at least during conflict you exist. Neglect erases you. He might not shout today, but he doesn't look at you either, doesn't ask how your day went, doesn't thank you for the dinner he inhaled, doesn't notice the way your eyes are rimmed red from holding back tears you didn't want the kids to see. You wonder which version is worse, the yelling or the vanishing. You ask him cautiously, "Are you okay?" He shrugs, "I'm fine." He's not fine, but he doesn't want to talk. Not really. Not unless it's to explain how you messed up, how you should have known better, how you always escalate things. You realize then his anger is just one face of the same problem: emotional illiteracy. He was never taught how to process feelings beyond frustration. He doesn't have the tools. So when sadness hits, he stiffens. When guilt creeps in, he gets mean. When shame brews, he gets quiet. He doesn't speak because he doesn't know how to without bleeding. A quirky anthropological fact. In some Amazonian tribes, boys are taught ritual crying songs to help them process pain. They wail together under moonlight. Their tears are honored, not mocked. And they grow up knowing grief and love are two sides of the same river. You wonder what your husband's childhood was like. You've heard fragments: a stern father, a house full of rules, a mother who never raised her voice but always looked tired. You imagine little him feeling small but being told to act big. Maybe his father never hugged him. Maybe no one taught him what to do with disappointment or fear. But none of that makes it your job to fix. You've become fluent in his moods, but he hasn't even learned the alphabet of yours. He doesn't ask what you need. When you're exhausted, he notices the undone laundry, not the bags under your eyes. When you're distant, he assumes you're being difficult, not depleted. When you cry, he gets uncomfortable. When you're angry, he gets louder until you're the one who ends up apologizing. You once hoped that love would soften him, that patience and kindness would draw him out of his shell. But some men don't see softness as a bridge. They see it as a rug to wipe their feet on. And you are so tired of being the rug. Because when your needs finally leak out after being bottled up for weeks or months, you're painted as too emotional, too sensitive, hard to talk to. But you've been quiet for so long you're not sure how else to be heard. So you start speaking anyway. You say things without cushioning them. You name his anger. You call out his silence, not to fight, but to break the spell of invisibility. You begin to claim space in conversations that always revolved around his emotions. And he doesn't like it. He withdraws more. At first, this feels like failure. You think, maybe I'm pushing him away. But slowly, something clicks. You're not pushing him away. He's been stepping back from you every time you needed him for years. You're just not chasing him anymore. That's the difference. Historians debate whether emotional labor in modern marriages should be measured like chores or treated as an entirely separate economy. But ask any woman doing it full time, and she'll tell you it's exhausting. The planning, the de escalating, the soothing, the anticipating. And you've done all of it. But now you're learning to do something else, like drawing boundaries, like walking away from arguments instead of engaging, like protecting your peace the way you used to protect his ego. You don't yell, you don't insult, but you don't bend anymore either. He notices. He gets colder. Then one night he finally says it. You've changed. You look at him steady. No, I'm just done pretending. There's a long silence. Maybe he'll get it. Maybe he won't. But at least now you do. Section 8. You wake up with a different kind of weight on your chest, not the usual dread, not the panic of tiptoeing through another emotionally loaded day, but the kind that comes from clarity. You know now that you're not crazy. You're not dramatic. You're not too much. You're just finally noticing what you've been surviving. He's distant again. Maybe punishing you for yesterday's conversation where you didn't back down, where you didn't fold your voice into a whisper just to avoid his sigh. You eat breakfast in silence. He drinks his coffee like it's armor. The kids mercifully are still asleep. You glance across the table. He's scrolling his phone, face blank. And it dawns on you he isn't thinking about how to make things better. He's waiting for you to. Because that's always been the script, hasn't it? You play the diplomat, the emotional janitor, the interpreter of his moods even when yours go unspoken. You reach across the silence. You repair the invisible thread. Again and again. But today you don't. And the world doesn't end. Historians still argue whether the modern emotional distance between spouses is a byproduct of industrial-era roles, men as providers, women as feelers, or a deeper rupture created by generations of emotional illiteracy passed like heirlooms. Whatever the cause, you're done being the unpaid translator. You think back to when you were dating, how charming he was, how deeply he looked at you, how he'd touch your back lightly in public like you were precious breakable in the best way. And it hits you, he was capable of tenderness. He still is. He just chooses not to access it. Because anger is easier. Because he's learned that softness requires vulnerability, and vulnerability terrifying. So, what does he do instead? He controls. Through tone, through absence, through correction, through silence, through the constant unspoken threat that if you don't behave the way he needs, he will withdraw what little warmth is left. You're not the only one who sees it. Your best friend has said it gently. He's hard on you. Your sister, less gently. Why do you let him talk to you like that? Even your mother, once a loyal defender, now pauses before saying he's just tired, like it's not a strong enough excuse anymore. You've started journaling, not because you're trying to write a memoir, but because you need proof that you're not imagining the patterns, that the emotional roller coaster isn't some figment of your fatigue. And when you flip through the pages there, they are the same words over and over again. He got mad when I asked for help. He ignored me all day. He called me sensitive. He apologized, then did it again. A quirky psychological study once revealed that the average woman apologizes more not because she makes more mistakes, but because her threshold for what's considered offensive is lower. In other words, you say sorry for breathing too loud because he flinched once. You're done apologizing for being a person. You decide to try something new. Not confrontation, not compliance, but curiosity. The next time his tone snaps like a whip over something minor, you look at him calm and level and ask, "What's really going on?" He freezes because he doesn't know. He's not used to being called in, only being called out, not used to being seen behind the anger. But you're not doing it to protect him anymore. You're doing it to reclaim the conversation. He shrugs, says, "I'm just tired." You nod. Okay, but you don't have to take it out on us. It's simple, unemotional, not an attack. Just the truth gently set between you like a mirror. He doesn't respond, just looks away. But later, he does the dishes without being asked. A tiny ripple. You don't take it as change. You've stopped being tricked by breadcrumbs. But you do take it as a sign that you can speak now. And maybe he's finally starting to listen. Historians have long noted that revolutions don't always start with explosions. Some start with whispers, with ordinary people saying no more, with women who decide that dignity isn't a luxury, it's a birthright. You're not trying to start a war. You're trying to stop living in one. That night, you tell the kids, "We always use kind words, even when we're mad." And your daughter nods like she's memorizing the rule for life. Your son says, "Even daddy." And you say yes, especially daddy, because the rules apply to everyone now, not just the ones who can't leave the room. And for the first time in a long time, your home feels like it's tilting not in collapse, but in course correction. Like maybe the ground beneath you isn't as fragile as you feared. Like maybe the loudest voice isn't the one in charge anymore. Section 9. You've been waiting for the moment when he finally sits down and says, "I've been awful. I want to change. I need help." But that moment doesn't come. Not in the way you hoped. Instead, it comes in fragments. A day without sarcasm. A passing mumbled thanks after dinner. Him putting away the laundry without being asked. You don't swoon. You don't even smile. Because by now you know better than to confuse crumbs for a feast. But still you notice. And he notices something too. You aren't bending like you used to. He makes a snide remark one morning about how much screen time the kids are getting. Usually, you'd explain yourself, justify the decision, apologize for the chaos. But this time, you sip your coffee and say, "If you'd like to make a schedule that works better, I'm happy to see it." He stares at you. You don't flinch. That's new. Historians still argue whether household authority is negotiated or enforced, especially in patriarchal frameworks. But modern research shows something deeply interesting. When one partner stops playing their assigned role, especially the caretaker role, it destabilizes the system enough to either force growth or collapse. And you've stopped playing. You're no longer the interpreter of moods, the peacekeeper, the ego buffer. You're just you. And that's what scares him most, not your anger, but your calm refusal to play the game. Because anger, he knows how to fight. But calm forces him to see himself. You've started doing little things that reclaim your identity. You laugh loudly at a joke your friend texts you. You dress up for no reason. You walk the dog alone just to breathe your own thoughts. You lock the bathroom door and take in actual bath candles and all. You say no when you mean it. And in those moments, you remember you are not the problem. You never were. A quirky little side note from a 1950s marriage manual. Yes, those actually existed advised women to greet your husband with a smile, a drink, and silence. Because his world was presumed harder, his work more stressful, his emotions more valid. Yours secondary. You sometimes wonder if he read one of those in spirit. But not anymore. Not here. Because you're not running a hotel. You're living a life. One evening, the kids are playing on the floor. You're folding laundry, humming peaceful for once. He walks in tense again. Maybe traffic. Maybe work. Who knows? He raises his voice over something trivial. The kids left their Legos out. You calmly say, "We're not doing yelling tonight. If you're upset, take a minute and come back." His face twists confused, then defensive, then something else. Something almost grateful. He disappears into the bedroom. You expect the usual: the cold shoulder, the door slam, the silence. But 10 minutes later, he comes back and says, I overreacted. Just that. It's not a grand gesture. It's not therapy. It's not healing. But it's a thread. One thin, trembling thread of accountability. You nod and go back to folding. You don't rush in with praise or reassurance. You let it sit. Because growth isn't something you coddle, it's something you allow. And this maybe is a start. You've done your research, you've read the articles, you've watched other women online whispering into their phones late at night saying, does anyone else feel like they're married to someone who doesn't see them anymore? You're not alone. There's a quiet revolution happening in kitchens and bedrooms and cars everywhere, women realizing that love doesn't mean erasure, that empathy doesn't mean martyrdom, that kindness isn't infinite when it's only one way. Historians look back at revolutions in terms of battles, blood declarations, but they forget the ones made in soft-spoken boundaries. In one woman one morning deciding not to apologize for needing peace. That's what you're doing now. And yes, there's fear. Because what if you keep changing and he doesn't? What if the silence never turns to growth? What if this new honest version of you means the end? But then you look at your kids. The way your daughter now says, I need a break instead of melting down. The way your son says, that hurt my feelings and expects to be heard. And you realize the healing is already happening. Not because he's transformed, but because you have. You're modeling emotional fluency. You're teaching kindness that includes yourself. You're showing that love without respect is just performance. And maybe, just maybe your home is shifting, not through his rage or silence, but through your quiet refusal to accept either as normal. It might not save the marriage, but it might save you. And right now that's enough. Section 10. He doesn't yell as much these days. But not because he suddenly became soft or poetic or transformed into someone who hugs the kids every hour and asks how you're doing. No. It's quieter than that. Slower. Subtler. The tension still lingers. You still sense it sometimes like heat rising off pavement, but it doesn't grip the house anymore. Because now you don't feed it. You don't meet it with silence or panic. You meet it with a pause, a firm line, and sometimes a walk out of the room. And he's noticed. Historians still argue whether change in domestic power dynamics stems more from cultural shifts or individual resistance. But in your home, it came from the smallest rebellion, you deciding your peace matters too. You didn't scream it. You didn't slam any doors. You just started living like it was true. And over time, that truth reshaped the air. Now when he's frustrated, he often stops himself. Sometimes mid-sentence, sometimes mid-glare. He'll take a breath, change the subject, swallow it. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough to notice. And you notice. He sees you now. Not all the way. Not the depth of what you carried, what you hid, what you healed in silence, but enough to make eye contact again. Enough to say thank you without being prompted. Enough to stay in the room when feelings rise instead of disappearing behind a wall of moodiness and football highlights. It's not a fairy tale. He still forgets birthdays unless reminded, still gets moody about bills, still rolls his eyes at parenting books, still grumbles when you take time for yourself. But he doesn't call you too sensitive anymore. He doesn't huff when the kids cry. He doesn't weaponize his silence quite as often. You've set the temperature, and he's had to adjust, or risk freezing alone. There's still so much he doesn't understand. About you, about himself, about how many years you spent wrapping yourself in his moods like armor. But there are moments now, brief flickering, where it feels like he wants to understand. And sometimes that's enough. Because this isn't about perfection. This is about progress. About protecting your children from thinking love always hurts, about showing them that being strong doesn't mean being silent. One evening, your son spills juice across the table. His hands fly up, eyes wide, expecting the usual thunder. But instead, his father says, "It's okay, buddy. Let's clean it up." and your son relaxes, and you exhale. And in that tiny moment, the whole house feels new. A quirky cultural detail in Iceland: fathers get mandated paternity leave, and it's changed the way families function. Studies show these dads are more emotionally involved, more connected, and more supportive long term. Why? Because they're present. Not just physically, emotionally. Maybe that's what you've been modeling this whole time. Presence. You haven't just survived anger, you've taught what comes after it. You've built a quiet, gentle revolution out of bedtime stories, boundary lines, and the word no. And he, whether he knows it or not, is standing in the world you shaped. Your daughter draws a picture for school, your family. She labels each one. Mommy, she writes, makes us feel safe. And you blink quickly, holding the paper like it's spun from light. This is your legacy, not a perfect marriage, not a silent home, but a space where feelings are allowed, where calm has replaced fear, and where no one's walking on eggshells just to survive breakfast. It's been a long journey, and you still carry the weight, but you're not carrying him anymore. And maybe he'll keep growing. Maybe he'll meet you in this space you've cleared, or maybe he won't. But you'll keep walking, calm, whole, seen. Because the woman who once whispered apologies into the silence now moves like someone who knows she belongs. And no one gets to take that from her again. Now let's slow things down for just a moment. The kids are in bed. The dishes are done. The house has settled into its soft nighttime hush. Maybe the fan is humming gently beside you. Maybe you're curled under a blanket, a quiet corner of the world finally yours again. Take a breath deep and full. Let it out slowly. You've walked through something big tonight. Something that might look ordinary from the outside, but carries the weight of generations on the inside. You've felt the sting of silence, the weight of moods, the ache of invisible effort. But now you're starting to see the difference between keeping the peace and being the peace. Let that truth settle into you like warmth into your bones. You're allowed to want softness, calm, reciprocity. You're allowed to name what hurts. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to stop apologizing for needing gentleness. The world will keep asking you to bend. But here in this space, in this moment, you are exactly enough. So close your eyes, breathe again, and know this healing doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it sounds exactly like silence that you chose. Sweet dreams.